Hello world, my name is Klaus Rostel, and I'm doing 100 innovation keynotes in 100 days. Today's number 83. Today I'm going to talk about a nifty piece of innovation theory called Diffusion of Innovations. And that starts with a book from 1962 by a gentleman named Everett Rogers called Diffusion of Innovations. Rogers is a sociologist. There is his full name, Everett Rogers, in case you want to Google him. He's a sociologist and also PhD, professor, yada yada, academic credentials impeccable. Now, I'm also not the first who covers this territory because this book is from 1962. So if you do a quick Google search of Diffusion of Innovations, you'll find a lot of interesting stuff. I'm not the first one to cover this. There is a point to that. There's a reason there's a smiley there because that's very much in theme with this talk. Because the idea in Diffusion of Innovations is pretty simple. Over time, everyone will eventually adopt new innovations. Now, I know, it's easy to say, but what about people who can't read? Or what about people in wheelchairs? Or what about people who speak different languages, depending on the innovation in question? What about people who don't like toast? Sure, not 100%, of course, will. So forget that for a moment. But what Rogers says in this book, he says there are several stages of technology adoption, several stages of innovation adoption. And first, there's the innovators, 2.5%. And it should be noted that these percentages, they're averages, they're estimates, they're conceptual percentages, if such a thing exists. Of course, it's not that you will always have 2.5% that are innovators, blah, 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 blah. But just to give a rough idea of where we are. Then there's the early adopters, 13.5% in Rogers' book. Then you have the early majority, 34%, or roughly 1/3. You have the late majority, 34%. And then you have the nice last group, which is called, bluntly, the laggards. And that brings us up to 100%. Now, 100% of those who will actually use the product, the service, be part of the movement, not 100% of the population in the world. Very important. So, there it is, 100%. Why is this relevant? Pretty simple to understand, but why is it relevant? Well, it's pretty relevant because no matter what you're doing, who are you serving is a question to ask. Bill Sherman, thought leadership, leverage guy, and a friend of mine taught me some years back to always be asking, who are you serving? And that's why it's here. Who are you serving? Are you serving the 2.5% innovators? Kind of the cutting edge folks who want the new thing before it's fully tested, before it's ready? Are you serving the 13.5% early adopters? Are you serving the early majority? Are you serving the late majority? Or are you serving the laggards? Now, the first question is, do you know? Do you care? Does it matter? Well, of course it matters. Because there's a huge difference between serving the people who are at the very forefront of a thing, whether it's the new iPhone or whether it's the Me Too movement or whether it's adopting an organizational scheme like holacracy or it's being a tourist in Montenegro. It doesn't really matter what it is, because there is a big difference between serving the innovators and that tiny, tiny part that are kind of the first to get there, or are you serving the late majority? Completely different ways of communicating, completely different problems, completely different communication landscape, different storytelling. The whole thing is different. Now, I've been at the forefront of pushing the envelope basically all of my career. Not all of it. I had a few years at the beginning when I was like a pedagogical assistant and helped kind of deal with kids or entertain kids or work with, let's just call it work with kids instead of deal with kids. Work with kids in after-school institutions. That wasn't very cutting edge. But since I've been 23, I've been working on the forefronts of innovation. I've been doing things not just for the 2.5%, maybe for the 0.2% or the 0.002%. And that's an interesting space to be in. I love that space. But it's also very different from when you're communicating to the late majority or even to the early majority, or even to the early adopters. And if you don't know where you are, if you don't know who you're talking to, who you're serving, to use Bill Sherman's words, well, then it's tricky, because then you're probably going to spend resources the wrong way. So question for you is, do you know who you're serving on this diffusion of innovations scale or model? Because it matters. It matters a lot. And I think with that, yeah, this turned out to be even shorter than I expected, because it only has one thing left to say. And I'm not going to be, okay, there was a joke about early adoption. Let's just forget it and say, if I didn't say this now, then I would be a laggard. See, that joke didn't work. No matter what. Thank you for listening.